Hi, good afternoon. My name is Bruce Murphy. I'm the owner of Murphy Mountain Farms, a relatively new farm that's actually dedicated to the preserving heritage apple trees. Also, I'm a special programs coordinator with the West Virginia Department of Agriculture. Today, I would like to talk to you about apple grafting and why we graft apples and some of the tools that we use to graft apples. We'll actually be using the tunnel whip method today to actually graft some apple trees. Number one, you're going to have to understand some reasons. Why do we graft apple trees? Well, the first reason we graft apple trees is because if you actually grow an apple tree from an apple seed, almost always it's a lesser quality fruit. So what we want to do is actually preserve that high quality of fruit in the apple tree that we actually have. So by grafting, we can actually make a perfect clone of that tree and actually establish that fruit to go on for generations to come. So that's the real reason why we graft apples. So with that said, you'll need to know a couple, two or three things about it. Number one, rootstocks. What's rootstock? Where do you get the rootstocks? And what's the rootstock's main purpose for that? So number one, of course, the roots is what supports the tree and gets the nourishment to the tree. But a rootstock has been developed over the years. Number one, first they used to plant them and just graft them into regular standard sized trees. And they've kind of perfected the rootstock now to actually where it can serve several different purposes with what they have. It actually, the biggest thing it does is determines actually the size of the tree. So you can actually have a dwarf tree, a semi-dwarf tree, or a standard tree. And there's a lot of variations of the semi-dwarf tree. So when you buy a semi-dwarf tree from a big box store, you really don't know what you're getting. What percentage tree will that grow? So size control is the main thing with rootstocks. Is it going to be a 40% tree, a 60%, an 80% tree? What's that going to do? The rootstock will determine it. And if you graft your own trees, you will actually know that by the rootstock you use. The next thing with rootstocks is it actually will determine how many years it takes for that tree to bear fruit. And by bearing fruit, if you use a standard tree from a seed, it may take as long as 10 to 12 years for it to have fruit on it. And if you use a smaller rootstock, a dwarf, it could actually produce fruit within 2 to 3 years. And then typically with a semi-dwarf, it could be 3 to 4 or a little bit longer. So you really want to know what kind of rootstock you're using so you'll know how long it's going to take to develop. One of the other things you need to know with that is the stability of the tree itself. Do you want a freestanding tree where you have plenty of room and you can actually weather the storms and through the years and you don't have to worry about blowing down or being susceptible in droughts? So usually the bigger size tree, the better it does. The smaller dwarf trees, most of the time you have to have some type of a trellis system or some type of support with that. And if it's a real dry year, you may have to have some irrigation with that. But again, you will have fruit a lot quicker and you can get more trees per acre. So if that's what your goal is just to have a lot of fruit per trees, you may want to go with a smaller one, but the bigger the size of the tree, the more fruit it will produce per tree. So that's a little bit about the rootstocks of what you have. The next thing you need to know if you're going to make a perfect clone of an apple tree is the sign wood. And the sign wood is a piece of the tree that you've cut out of your apple tree, and you typically cut this piece out in January, February, and sometimes late March. So you want to cut this out, and you're looking for what they call last year's growth, or some people would call last year's wood. So this particular limb came out of a Golden Delicious tree, and this was a complete growth from last year. Now, if this wasn't, you may have a growth ring someplace on it, and then if you had a little growth nodule or a ring that would go all the way around it, then you really wouldn't want to use this, which would be 2 years ago growth. And then this piece would grow from last summer. So you would want to use just the piece that come out of this. And typically on this, you would want to have at least 2 buds. I prefer 2 buds. I don't prefer any more than 3. I do like to cut my wood out a little bit later in the year because I think the buds are a little bit more developed. if you actually cut them out the 1st of January in some of the colder areas of the Appalachians, the buds have not developed real well, but they will still grow. They're still there, but a little bit later they'll swell up a little bit more, and I have a little bit better production out of them. So that's the piece of wood you want to get, and this is called scion wood, S-C-I-O-N, and that's the piece you want to get. Now today, like I said, we'll be doing the tongue and whip method. So with that, we'll take a piece of the rootstock. We'll be cutting a little slice on it. We'll be cutting a little piece of the scion wood, and we'll be matching those two together. And by doing this, we'll need a couple, 2 or 3 tools that you need to. I like grafting tape. If you can't get grafting tape to actually tape them back together, you can actually use freezer tape, which is pretty good with that. It's not too bad. It's a little sticky with that. I like a good pair of pruning shears. And with the pruning shears, it actually helps me to cut the pieces off before I start using my knife, my grafting knife, to actually make the actual smooth cuts for the graft itself. And also with that, we'll actually use some grafting wax also to seal at the end. A couple things you don't want to forget is magic marker. You really need to mark the tree itself, what you did if you're grafting a bunch of trees through multiple days. You want to leave these trees in a cool spot where it's out of the sun, say in your garage, the back of your garage where it's cool and out of the sun, room temperature, a little cooler than room temperature, and then you want to leave them for at least a few weeks, but you don't want to leave them too longer. So the minimum's about 2 weeks to 10 days in there, and then you want to take them out, put them in the sunlight, and let them start growing from there. Number one, where you put the 2 splices together, they have to heal together and blend together. So that takes at least 10 days, a couple weeks. It doesn't hurt to leave them for 3 weeks. So you need kind of a depends on how warm your garage is, depends on what kind of sunlight you get. Like I said, you want to keep them out of the sunlight, and how late in the year it is and what you want to do with that. So you want to keep that, remember, at market. After I do this, I actually like to wrap them with some paper towels. I like to use a little bit of bottled water usually on that, because I don't like some of your city waters actually have really high doses of chlorine and stuff in them. I really don't like to use that. So with that said, we'll get a rootstock. So this was basically a typical little apple tree. Had the top cut out of it last year, and the reason why it doesn't have any limbs on it or leaves on it is because it actually, after they fell off last year in the fall, it was harvested, it was put in cold storage, and this is where it's at. Now you don't want to leave the leaves out very long, and you certainly don't want to leave them out in the sunlight. So we'll try to give them a little bit of protection right here. Start with, they really do get damaged pretty quick with that. So with this said, you got a rootstock, you got a piece of scion wood. Now with this, you have to match up a little thin piece, and I'm sure this is too small on the camera with filming from an iPhone. It's really hard to do, but there's a little piece that actually is called the Cambrian layer, and it's a very thin piece, and it's a little green piece. And we'll see if we can't get this filmed in this right here, because there's a little illustration that you can see. It's actually the little green piece in this, and the reason why I showed you that in color where it's green is you have to match those 2 pieces of the Cambrian layer together when you're making this splotch. So if you match that Cambrian layer together, that's where the growth is, and that's where it'll go from there, where it'll actually start growing. So that's what you need to do. Now, one of the things I do like to do with the rootstocks, as I'm doing this, and my scion wood, is I use a little thing that I call like the thumb to thumb method with that. So you really, the better that you can match the rootstock to the scion wood, the better off you are. So the rule of thumb is basically thumb to thumb, a pinky to pinky will do real well with that, and you match those together. It doesn't do quite so well if you do the pinky to the thumb. So it's not going to match those 2 little layers together. Although you can, if that's all you have, as a mismatch with it, just make sure you kind of cut it off to one side, you shove it over, and make sure at least one side of the union has a good connection to the cambrian layer. Like I said, the cambrian layer is the very small little green layer that's in there. It's pretty thin. So let's look this over. So let's figure out where we're at with this. I like to use the snips, like I said, to make a good little piece of wood. And if you can see, there's the little green piece in that. It's very good with that. Now, we'll take this and we'll start matching. And you just kind of go back and forth and roll it back and forth on that and see about where you're at. So it seems to be right about there. So I like to come over. I want to make about a 3/4 inch cut on this. And the first piece of it, have a sharp knife. And there you want to, I don't know if you would call that a 45 or what you'd want, but it's about a 3/4 inch cut. And really with this, you'd want to match these two. And this is actually cheating with this because, of course, this piece is going to be like this. The tough part is when you match this piece to that. So you want to look at that, and you want to come back, and you want to start trying to cut that piece down. Okay, so I've actually cut it. We've come in a little closer so you can actually see it. So I've actually cut a layer like this with this angle. And here's my sign wood, and we've actually cut it with that. So what we're actually going to do is the center of it will be a little white spot with side of it. We're going to go between the center and we're going to go between the edge. And we're actually going to kind of work the knife in, down in the blade end, and we're going to actually make a little cut like that. So that's the tongue and the whip. We're actually going to do the same thing with the piece of rootstock, which is a little harder. I like to just put my knife in and I like to work it down with this. One thing with this is too, you'll get a lot of people, a lot of grafters will tell you, say, and you know, I'm a mediocre grafter, but a lot of people say, you know, I'm really a great grafter and I've been grafting for years and years and I've never cut myself. They're probably lying to you. So it doesn't hurt to use some gloves every now and then with that. So I do like to wet my wood. A lot of people will stick it in their mouth, which I like to do that sometimes too. It's really easy. And then with that, we'll peel this back a little bit, peel that piece back a little bit, and then we'll see how the union actually goes together. And then, like I said, it's a little bit better if you can do it that. There'll be maybe just a little hint of daylight in that, and they'll go together quite like that. So there's your rootstock, and there's a piece of the sign wood would do this. This particular one is a Golden Delicious tree. A Golden Delicious tree that come from an old orchard that was planted years and years ago, and I was fortunate enough to get some with that. So that pieces of sign wood, this will fall from that. So you want to go with this. You want to get that wrapped up. Keep that down. Here comes your grafting tape. Now with your grafting tape, you start down low. I usually like to hold it with my thumb, get it started back and forth, and this actually seals it off. So you're coming up, now I'm putting quite a bit of pressure on this. As I come up to the actual union where it's cut, I'm putting a little bit of pressure back and forth with that, so it actually holds that together and helps seal it. This is really a very strong union with that. So it kind of comes back and forth with that, and it actually does that. Now here's where I like to do some of my freezer tape with this. I'll actually come back, I'll take my freezer tape, take a little piece of that. Those usually stick together pretty well, but this tape's a couple years old and it's not sticking quite as well. And then I'll come back and put a little piece of freezer tape. Now with that, I do have some grafting wax, and I can actually use a little beeswax and cut that up there. And I'll put that on it. I do like to use, and you should always do this when you're pruning anything, a 45. If there's anything that comes out, it'll go away from the bud. So I've got 3 actually buds on this one that should be pretty good. So let me put this back in the water, and let's try this again. Maybe with a a smaller one. Okay, so let's see if we can match this up someplace. It's very important too with this that you actually get, if you're going to do a lot of grafting, you're going to cut a lot of trees, make sure that you keep everything marked, make sure you keep everything labeled, and make sure you watch what you're doing. So this is the old piece of wood that come from the rootstock. If I'd happen to make a mistake and graft this back into the tree, I really haven't gained anything. I've just made a clone of the rootstock that I already have. So let's cut another piece of wood off. There we go. There you go again, is that green Cambrian layer around the edges of it. I'm going to come back down. Try to make some kind of just an eyeball type comparison here where I might want to be, and it looks like right about there is where they're matching up. So I want to come down to about there. And like I said, it's very important that you actually do the two different. Make sure you want to make sure, and you want to do about 3/4 of an inch cut. Seems like I always cut a little bit better when I'm doing my rootstock rather than my sign wood. And if you have to, you can actually do a little bit of whittling on that to get it down to about where you want it. So let's look and see how that's going to match up. Not matching up real great. It's a little bit here. Match it up a little bit better by doing that, and it's okay. You want to make sure that that Cambrian layer is matching up. And that's really what we're working on, is the Cambrian layer. We want to match it up. Like I said, I like some of the old timers that I've had the fortune to be around, and they actually, I think they make these cuts with their eyes closed. They don't do too much whittling like I do. But we want to come back again. We want to make our little downward cut, and we want to take our knife and just work it in. Yeah, into it. So I actually have that. Come back with our sign wood. Work that in. Again, like I said, I do like to use a little bit of water on them. I do like to give them a little bit wet, especially when we're early spring and we're out here and the sun's really coming out today. And we want to match that up the best we can with that. So we want to come back with that. And then we'll see if we can get the tape in it to kind of press it together a little bit. Like I said, I do like to put a little pressure on that as I go. I like to take my time to get up to where the connection is. I like to bring it up. I like to wrap it a couple times. That seals it all. This is very important. That's what's really good about the grafting tape. It actually works as a seal. And you want that seal, and you just have to realize that maybe this is just like if you've cut yourself. And this is a Band-Aid, and it has to be sealed up, and it has to keep all the nasty stuff out there, and it has to actually heal itself. And that's what we're going to do with this. So we'll put it back. We'll put it in my garage. We'll leave it there for a little while, a couple of weeks, and we'll get it out and put it in the sunlight, and it should take right off and grow. Okay, so that's a couple examples how to do it. Remember, just get yourself a good rootstock. You can get these through a lot of the commercial nurseries. You can order these online. They're really not very expensive. Get you a good tree that you want to graft, that you know what the tree is, and you know that you like the fruit, and then you determine what you have from the start. So if you do that, hopefully these grafting tips have helped you out, and I wish you much success.